Imagine standing on grass that feels hot beneath your feet. Steam rises from cracks in the earth. The air smells like rotten eggs mixed with burning coal. You are standing in a town where the ground has been on fire for over 60 years. This is Centralia, Pennsylvania, a place where one small mistake turned into a disaster that will burn for centuries. Today, I'm going to tell you the complete story of how an American town was swallowed by flames from below, how a community of nearly 3,000 people vanished because nobody bothered to seal a 15-foot hole, and why this fire will keep burning long after everyone reading this is gone. The story begins in 1749. Native Americans sold this piece of land in eastern Pennsylvania for 500 pounds. The land changed hands many times over the years. One owner was Robert Morris, a hero from the Revolutionary War who signed the Declaration of Independence. But the man who really understood what this land was worth was Stephen Girard. Girard was a French sea captain with a sharp eye for opportunity. In 1830, he bought the land at auction for $30,000. He knew something incredibly valuable was buried beneath those hills: anthracite coal. This is the highest grade of coal that exists. It burns hotter and cleaner than any other type, and this region in Pennsylvania held 95% of all the anthracite coal in the entire United States. A mining engineer named Alexander Rea arrived in 1842. He drew up plans for a proper town. He wanted to call it Centerville, but another town with that name already existed nearby. So he changed it to Centralia. The Mine Run Railroad arrived in 1854. Now they could ship coal out of the valley in massive quantities. By 1862, mines were opening everywhere: the Locust Run Mine, Coal Ridge Mine, Hazel Dell Colliery, the Centralia Mine itself. The town exploded with growth. Coal meant jobs. Jobs meant families. Families meant businesses. At its absolute peak in 1890, Centralia was home to 2,761 people. Think about everything a thriving town of that size needs. The streets buzzed with activity from 7 churches, 5 hotels, a bank, a post office, 14 grocery stores, 2 theaters for entertainment on weekends, and perhaps most impressive of all, the town had 27 saloons. In coal country, miners worked hard and played hard. The population was a colorful mix of immigrants chasing the American dream. Irish families arrived first, then waves of Ukrainian, Russian, and Eastern European immigrants followed. Each group brought their own traditions, churches, and culture. The Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Ukrainian Catholic Church was built in 1911. It still stands today. It is the last surviving church in Centralia. Life in a coal town was not easy. The work was dangerous. The hours were long. The pay barely covered expenses. This frustration gave rise to the Molly Maguires. They were a secret society of Irish-American miners who fought for better wages and working conditions. Sometimes they used violence. On October 17, 1868, the town founder Alexander Rea was murdered. He was traveling by buggy between Centralia and the neighboring town of Mount Carmel. 3 men connected to the Molly Maguires were hanged for his death 10 years later. Despite the danger and the drama, Centralia was home. Generations grew up there. They got married there. They raised their children there. They knew their neighbors by name. They gathered at church on Sundays. They celebrated weddings and holidays together. One former resident later remembered it like this: every block there was somebody you knew, or one of your aunts and uncles. It was just really a wonderful experience to grow up in a town as close-knit as Centralia. But nothing lasts forever, especially not coal. The anthracite coal industry peaked around World War I. Demand for this clean burning fuel was at its highest. Then the decline began. The Wall Street crash of 1929 devastated coal towns across Pennsylvania. The Lehigh Valley Coal Company closed 5 mines around Centralia during the Depression. Desperate miners turned to bootleg mining. This meant unauthorized digging in abandoned mines to extract whatever coal they could find and sell. The practice was dangerous and often illegal, but families had to eat. Some miners used a technique called pillar robbing. They removed the coal pillars that supported mine ceilings. This created a honeycomb of unstable tunnels beneath the earth, a network that would prove disastrous later. By the early 1960s, most of the commercial mining operations had shut down. Centralia's population had dropped to around 1,100 to 1,500 people. The town was quieter now, but it was still a community. People still went to church on Sundays. Kids still played in the streets. The future did not look particularly bright, but nobody could have predicted what was about to happen. In 1962, a single decision would set off a chain of events that would doom Centralia forever. The trouble started with garbage. Centralia's old town dump had been shut down earlier in 1962. It did not meet new state regulations. The Borough Council needed a new place to dispose of trash. They found what seemed like a perfect solution: an abandoned strip mine pit at the edge of town, right next to the Oddfellows Cemetery. The pit had been excavated by Edward Whitney back in 1935 to remove surface coal. It measured about 300 feet wide, 75 feet long, 50 feet deep, plenty of room for a town's garbage. There was just one problem. A 15-foot wide hole in the base of the pit's north wall connected directly to the labyrinth of abandoned coal mines beneath the Oddfellows town. This hole was hidden by garbage and debris. It was never properly sealed with fireproof material, as state law required. George Segeritis was a regional landfill inspector. He had noticed holes in the pit walls. He warned the Borough Council that they needed to fill them with non-combustible material. The council was supposed to install fire-resistant clay barriers between each layer of trash. They fell behind schedule. The barriers were never completed. On the evening of May 27, 1962, the Centralia Borough Council made a fateful decision. It was the Sunday before Memorial Day. They hired 5 members of the volunteer fire company to clean up the landfill before the holiday. The method? Set the garbage on fire. It was common practice at the time, even though Pennsylvania law technically prohibited dump fires. That night, the firefighters ignited the trash. They used water to douse the visible flames when the job seemed done. They went home. Everyone went to sleep. Nobody knew that deep beneath the surface, embers had found their way through that unsealed hole and into something far more dangerous than garbage. They had lit a fuse connected to millions of tons of coal. At first, nothing seemed wrong, but within days, flames reappeared at the dump. On May 29th, firefighters returned to douse them again. On June 4th, another flare-up. This time, a bulldozer stirred up the garbage to expose hidden pockets of flame. Firefighters could extinguish them with hoses. It still was not enough. By early July, something strange was happening. Monsignor William J. Burke at St. Ignatius Church complained about foul odors, the smell of smoldering trash and something else, something sulfurous. It was drifting into his church from the direction of the landfill. Residents near the dump noticed the same thing. Wisps of smoke began seeping from the ground. Steam curled from cracks in the earth. Clarence Kashner was president of the local miners' union. Everyone called him Mooch. He investigated and did not like what he found. He contacted Gordon Smith, an engineer at the Department of Mines and Mineral Industries. Smith sent Art Joyce, a mine inspector, to the site with gas detection equipment. The results were alarming. The gases rising from those cracks contained carbon monoxide, at concentrations typical of underground mine fires. The landfill fire had not died. It had escaped. Somewhere beneath Centralia, the coal seams themselves were burning. On August 9, 1962, inspectors found lethal levels of carbon monoxide in mines around the town. The next day, all 23 active mines in the Centralia area were ordered closed. Hundreds of miners suddenly had no work. The state scrambled to respond. On August 22nd, a contract was awarded to a company called Bridie Incorporated to dig out the fire. The estimated cost was $20,000. The plan seemed straightforward. Excavate around the fire's perimeter. Remove the burning material. Stop the spread. It did not work. The State Department of Mines and Mineral Industries had forbidden exploratory drilling. They wanted to determine how far the fire had actually spread. Engineers guessed at the fire's size based on how much steam they could see. They guessed wrong. The original estimate called for removing 24,000 cubic yards of earth. By the time the project ran out of money on October 29, 1962, Bridie had excavated 58,580 cubic yards, more than double the estimate, and the fire had moved faster than they could dig. Worse still, the excavation had accidentally made things worse. When workers broke through into mine chambers, oxygen rushed in. Fire loves oxygen. The flames spread faster, burning northward and deeper into the coal seams. The state tried again with a different approach: flushing. Starting in November 1962, contractors drilled holes in a semicircular pattern. They pumped in a mixture of crushed rock and water. They were hoping to smother the flames. This project fought against nature itself. An unusually harsh winter froze the water supply lines. The rock grinding machine froze solid during a blizzard. When funding ran out on March 15, 1963, officials conducted new tests. The results were devastating. Steam rising from fresh cracks indicated the fire had spread as far as 700 feet eastward. In less than a year, 2 major firefighting efforts had failed. The fire was winning. From 1963 through the late 1970s, Centralia and its underground fire existed in an uneasy stalemate. The state government considered 3 different plans in 1963. The costs ranged from $82,300 to $277,490. They abandoned all of them. Other projects received higher priority. Money was tight. The fire did not seem to be causing immediate problems for most residents. Life went on. People still lived in Centralia. They went to work. They raised families. But the fire beneath them never stopped burning. It crept through the maze of abandoned mine tunnels, following coal seams in multiple directions, spreading like an underground cancer. Journalist David DeCock began covering the story in 1976. He wrote for the News Item newspaper in nearby Shamokin. Over the next decade, he would write more than 500 articles about the Centralia mine fire. He eventually became the world's foremost expert on the disaster. What he found shocked him. The fire had been quietly advancing for 14 years while the government looked the other way. By the late 1970s, residents began reporting symptoms they could not explain: headaches, dizziness, nausea, fatigue. Some complained of burning eyes and the constant taste, of sulfur in their mouths. Carbon monoxide was seeping into basements and homes. This is an odorless, colorless gas that kills by binding to your blood cells. It starves your body of oxygen. Then, in 1979, came the moment that made everyone pay attention. John Coddington owned a gas station on Centralia's main street. He also happened to be the town's mayor. One day, while checking his underground fuel tanks, Coddington inserted a dipstick into one of the storage tanks. It felt warm. Curious, he lowered a thermometer into the tank. The reading was 172 degrees Fahrenheit. Gasoline normally sits at ambient temperature, maybe 50 or 60 degrees in Pennsylvania. At 172 degrees, those thousands of gallons of fuel were approaching the point where vapors could ignite. The entire gas station could have exploded, taking the town's main intersection with it. Coddington measured his basement floor. It was 136 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire was not miles away anymore. It was directly beneath people's homes. Before we continue with this incredible story, I need to ask you something. If you are finding this history fascinating, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue making these deep dive videos about forgotten stories from history. And hit the notification bell so you do not miss the next one. Now let me tell you about the day that changed everything. By 1981, the situation had become a slow-motion emergency. Carbon monoxide levels in some homes exceeded safe limits. Ground temperatures in certain areas topped 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Smoke poured from sinkholes. But the government still debated what to do, and many residents were not ready to leave their homes. Then came Valentine's Day. On Saturday, February 14, 1981, a group of state politicians arrived in Centralia. They came to tour the affected areas and meet with borough officials. Florence Domboski sent her 12-year-old son, Todd, to investigate. He wanted to know why important-looking outsiders were wandering around town. Todd noticed thin wisps of smoke rising from a grassy area near a tree. It was by his grandmother's house at 131 Locust Avenue. Being a curious kid, he walked over to investigate. Without any warning, the ground vanished beneath his feet. Todd plunged into a sinkhole that had opened suddenly beneath him. He sank up to his armpits in hot, sticky mud before managing to grab a tree root. It was sticking out from the wall of the hole. Steam billowed around him, thick and choking. The hole was 4 feet wide at the surface. It dropped 150 feet straight down into the burning earth below. Todd's 14-year-old cousin Eric Wolfgang heard his screams. Eric ran over and grabbed Todd's arm. He pulled him out of the hole in less than a minute. Later analysis revealed something terrifying. The steam pouring from that sinkhole contained lethal levels of carbon monoxide. If Todd had lost his grip, or if Eric had been a few seconds slower, the 12-year-old would have died, either from the fall, the heat, or the poison gas. The Philadelphia Inquirer called it a Valentine's Day flirt with death. This time, the politicians who had come to tour Centralia witnessed the danger firsthand. Days later, Governor Dick Thornburg arrived by helicopter to see the sinkhole himself. He immediately provided temporary housing to 3 families whose homes were deemed unsafe. The Todd Domboski incident changed everything. Suddenly, Centralia was not just a local problem, it was national news. The image of a 12-year-old boy nearly swallowed by a hole of smoke and fire was impossible to ignore. Tragically, Todd's story did not end happily. The near-death experience left psychological scars that never healed. He suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and nightmares for the rest of his life. He turned to medication to cope. On February 4, 2022, just days before the 41st anniversary of his brush with death, Todd Domboski died of a medication overdose at age 53. He was in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The fire that almost killed him as a child had haunted him for 4 decades. After the Domboski incident, pressure mounted on the government to do something, anything to stop the fire. Between 1962 and 1978, state and federal authorities had already spent $3,300,000 on various firefighting efforts. All had failed. Over the years, engineers tried everything they could think of. They dug deep trenches around the fire's perimeter. They were hoping to create fire breaks. The fire simply moved faster. Then they could dig. Or it found new paths through interconnected mine tunnels. They pumped millions of gallons of water, mixed with crushed rock, sand, and fly ash, into the mines. They were hoping to flood and smother the flames. At temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, much of this material simply burned away. The fire found gaps and kept spreading. They pumped 122,556 tons of fly ash through 1,600 boreholes. They were attempting to create underground barriers. The barriers were breached. The fire continued. They tried to cut off the fire's oxygen supply by sealing every surface opening they could find. But the fire created its own openings. As coal burned to ash, the ground collapsed. This created new cracks and sinkholes that let oxygen rush back in. The fundamental problem was simple but unsolvable. You cannot put out a fire you cannot reach. In 1983, the Office of Surface Mining commissioned a study. They wanted to determine what it would actually take to extinguish the Centralia fire completely. The study was done by GAI consultants. Their conclusion was staggering. The estimated cost to extinguish the fire was $663 million. That is equivalent to approximately $1,900,000,000 in 2024 dollars. The only viable method would be massive excavation. They would need to dig a pit 3/4 of a mile long, as deep as a 45-story building. They would have to remove every piece of burning coal. Even then, success was not guaranteed. The fire had spread to depths of 300 feet over an 8-mile stretch. It was advancing along 4 separate fronts simultaneously. Nobody could say with certainty where all the burning coal was located. The math was brutal but clear. It would cost $42 million to relocate everyone in Centralia. It would cost 15 times that much to maybe, just maybe, stop the fire. And even $663 million might not work. The government chose relocation. In November 1983, Congress approved $42 million for a voluntary relocation program. The Federal Office of Surface Mining made $38,900,000 available to buy out Centralia's residents. The average household received about $52,000 for their property, plus an additional $15,000 for moving expenses. For some families, the buyout was a relief. Their homes had been losing value for years. Carbon monoxide had made some houses nearly uninhabitable. The government was offering fair market value, sometimes more for properties that might otherwise have been worthless. For others, the buyout felt like surrender. They had grown up in Centralia. Their parents had grown up in Centralia. Their grandparents were buried in Centralia's cemeteries. How do you put a price on that? The community fractured along bitter lines. Researchers Steve Kroll-Smith and Steve Couch studied what happened. They found that Centralia residents formed at least 6 distinct community groups. Each had different interpretations of the danger, different opinions about what should be done. Neighbors who had been friends for decades stopped speaking to each other. Families were torn apart over whether to take the money and leave or stay and fight. David DeCock, the journalist who chronicled Centralia's decline, observed something heartbreaking. Those who wished to stay often felt betrayed when others left. Some viewed leaving as a triumph. The government was paying for their properties which had been threatened by the mine fire. Others saw it as giving up in the face of adversity. Between 1985 and 1991, the government acquired 545 residences and businesses. Homes that families had lived in for generations were demolished, one by one. By the end of 1986, fewer than 50 houses remained standing. Where more than 1,000 people once lived, the churches closed. St. Ignatius Church had served Catholics since 1869. It once had a membership exceeding 3,000 people. It held its final Mass in June 1995. The building was demolished in November 1997. Saints Peter and Paul Russian Orthodox Church was built in 1916. It was torn down in 1986. Schools shut their doors. Children now had to attend classes in Mount Carmel. The post office was demolished in 1997. One day, all the road signs showing directions to Centralia were simply removed. One former resident recalled it like this: all the signs showing nearby towns had been replaced, with Centralia off. The United States Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code in September 2002. The code was 17927. A town that had once required its own post office to handle mail for nearly 3,000 people was erased from the postal system entirely. Not everyone accepted the government's money. A stubborn handful of residents dug in their heels. They refused to abandon their homes, no matter what the government said, no matter how much money was offered, no matter what dangers lurked beneath the ground. Lamar Mervine was born on February 11, 1916, at 411 Troutwine Street in Centralia. He lived in that same house for his entire life, 94 years. When other residents fled, Lamar and his wife Lana stayed put. He eventually became Centralia's mayor, a position he held until his health declined. In a 2006 interview, the 90-year-old Mervyn told the Christian Science Monitor something powerful. "We have got a problem. The problem is that the state of Pennsylvania wants to wipe Centralia off the map." He compared the government's actions to the siege at Waco, Texas. He told reporters this: "Out there, everybody was lying to them, and the same thing is happening here." Lamar's wife Lana died in 2008. Lamar followed on New Year's Day 2010. He passed away in a nursing home after suffering from dementia. But their son Harold Mervine continues to live in the family home today. He is one of the last occupied structures in Centralia. John Lakaitis Jr. became the unofficial caretaker of his dying town. He was featured prominently in the 2007 documentary, The Town That Was. The film showed him mowing the grass along Locust Street, unlocking and relocking cemetery gates daily, repainting the American Legion bench, putting up Christmas decorations on utility poles near his house, all at his own expense. One documentary reviewer noted the heartbreaking disconnect. His statements about there being no danger in the area does not square with the reality that is all around him. In one scene, Lokitis says something like, "The government will not let those remaining sell the land and restart the town, even though it is safe." He is saying this as the field behind him continues to belch smoke. Lokitis lived in his grandfather's home. He refused to leave until he was evicted in July 2009. His house was subsequently demolished. John Komarniski was different from the other holdouts. He did not grow up in Centralia. He actually moved there after the fire started. At 45, he was one of the town's youngest remaining residents. "People have called it a ghost town," Komarniski once said, "but I look at it as a town that is now full of trees instead of people. And truth is, I would rather have trees than people." He pointed to the empty lot outside his kitchen window. "What is not to like? There used to be a gas station out my kitchen window. Now there's just grass and trees. I've even got a nice long driveway." He was gesturing toward the abandoned street that now led only to his house. Komarniski was evicted in May 2009. For more than 20 years, the remaining residents fought the government in court. They challenged the eminent domain proceedings. They appealed rulings. They refused to give up. The legal battle dragged through county courts, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, federal appeals courts. Finally, on October 29, 2013, both sides reached a settlement. The 7 remaining residents would receive $218,000 in compensation for their property values, plus an additional $131,500 to settle other claims, a total of $349,500. In return, the residents received something money could not buy: the right to stay. Under the agreement, the remaining Centralians can live in their homes for the rest of their lives. They cannot sell, inherit, or transfer their property to anyone. When each resident dies, their home reverts to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania through eminent domain. Their attorney, Don Bailey, called it a victory. They get to live in their property and enjoy it the rest of their life. We did very well. There is a strange irony to the settlement. Since the state now holds the deeds to their properties, the remaining residents no longer pay property taxes. They live rent-free on state-owned land, watching over a ghost town while a fire burns beneath their feet. To understand why the Centralia fire can never be extinguished, you need to understand how underground coal fires work, and why they are nearly impossible to stop. Coal is essentially concentrated plant matter that has been compressed and heated over millions of years. When coal is exposed to oxygen, it oxidizes. This is a slow chemical reaction that produces heat. If enough heat builds up and cannot escape, the temperature rises until the coal spontaneously ignites. Some low-grade coals can catch fire at temperatures as low as 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Once ignited, a coal seam fire is self-sustaining. As coal burns, it turns to ash. This creates underground voids. The ground above cracks and collapses. This process is called subsidence. These cracks allow fresh oxygen-rich air to flow down to the fire. Hot gases rise up through other cracks. This creates a natural convection current that continuously feeds the flames. Here is the terrifying part. A coal fire can continue smoldering with as little as 1 to 2% oxygen. Normal air contains 21% oxygen. Even in spaces with almost no air circulation, there is usually enough oxygen to keep the fire alive. The temperatures involved make conventional firefighting useless. At the heart of the Centralia fire, temperatures exceed 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The highest reading ever recorded in a Centralia borehole was 1,350 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures, water does not extinguish fire. It instantly vaporizes into steam. This can potentially create dangerous explosions. Materials pumped into the mines to smother the fire simply burn away. The only reliable method to stop an underground coal fire is total excavation. You have to physically dig out every piece of burning coal. But the Centralia fire now burns at depths of up to 300 feet over an 8-mile stretch. The affected area covers approximately 3,700 acres. Excavating all of that burning coal would mean creating a pit bigger than many surface mines, at a cost that would dwarf the gross domestic product of some small countries. Meanwhile, the fire continues to spread. It advances along 4 separate fronts at a rate of approximately 50 to 75 feet per year. Scientists estimate that enough coal remains to keep the fire burning for at least 250 more years, potentially until the year 2275 or beyond. For perspective, the oldest known underground coal fire in the world is at Burning Mountain in Australia. It has been burning for approximately 6,000 years. Another coal fire in Germany at Brennender Berg has been burning since 1668. Over 350 years, underground coal fires do not burn out on human timescales. They burn on geological timescales. What was it like to live in Centralia while the fire burned beneath you? Former residents describe a surreal existence. One recalled this: "There was a lot of coughing." If you know what black lung is, it is what the coughing sounded like. This cough, where you can hear the mucus, worse than what smokers have. If you spent enough time near the smoke, you got a cough like that. The dead animals were another horror. Deer would occasionally fall into sinkholes and die from the heat or toxic gases. Every once in a while, one former resident remembered, you would come across a deer sticking out vertically with steam billowing out. They looked like they were crawling out. The poor deer had fallen into a sinkhole and had either starved to death or suffocated to death from the fumes. One particularly disturbing memory involved a neighbor's cat. A patch of grass suddenly turned brown. Their cat was standing there, and it suddenly became brown, but it was just another hole, and the cat went down. A 1984 study by Penn State confirmed what residents already knew. Centralians suffered a higher incidence of health problems than people in neighboring towns. The combination of carbon monoxide exposure, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and other toxic gases took a measurable toll on people's bodies. Even the dead could not escape. A 1981 People magazine article noted this: "Even the dead cannot rest in peace." Graves in the town's 2 cemeteries are believed to have dropped into the abyss of fire that rages below them. Drive to Centralia today, and at first glance, you might not realize you have arrived at one of America's most famous ghost towns. The landscape looks like a field crisscrossed by paved roads that lead nowhere. Look closer, and you will see the ghosts. Sidewalks buckled by tree roots, fire hydrants standing guard over empty lots, curbs and front steps leading to houses that no longer exist. Occasional metal steam vents protrude from the ground in the southern part of the borough. According to the 2020 census, exactly 5 people still live in Centralia. This makes it the least populated municipality in Pennsylvania. Those 5 residents are down from 2,761 at the town's peak. They occupy a handful of neatly kept homes scattered among the ruins. A few structures remain standing. The municipal building on Locust Avenue still exists, complete with an attached fire station garage. It fell into disrepair but received new siding in 2012. It still hosts annual cleanup events. The Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church sits on a hill overlooking the town. Built in 1911, it is the only surviving church in Centralia. A geological survey revealed that solid rock, not coal, lies beneath it. So the church is not at risk of collapse. Remarkably, it still holds weekly Sunday services. It attracts about 50 worshipers from surrounding communities. Pastor Michael Husko offers donuts and coffee after services because there is nowhere else to go. 4 cemeteries remain: Oddfellows Cemetery, St. Mary's Orthodox Cemetery, Saints Peter and Paul Cemetery, St. Ignatius Cemetery. All are maintained in good condition, though steam sometimes rises from the ground nearby. The most famous feature of modern Centralia used to be Graffiti Highway. This was a 3/4-mile section of the original Route 61 that was closed in 1993. The fire had caused the road to buckle and crack. Over the decades, visitors covered the abandoned asphalt with colorful spray paint art. It turned into an unofficial canvas for messages, artwork, and graffiti. Graffiti Highway became a pilgrimage site for urban explorers, for photographers, for fans of the Silent Hill video game franchise. People came from New York, New Jersey, and across the country. They wanted to walk its cracked surface, to photograph the steam rising from fissures. But in April 2020, the property owners had enough. Pagnotti Enterprises owned the land. After years of complaints about littering, vandalism, and trespassing, they took action. After crowds violated COVID-19 social distancing guidelines during a bonfire gathering that required a fire department response, they buried the highway under approximately 9,000 tons of dirt. Tom Hynoski was Centralia's fire chief and emergency management agency director. He supported the decision. The constant stream of visitors had become a problem. They were disturbing the peace of nearby St. Ignatius Cemetery, creating endless headaches for the remaining residents. Today, nature is reclaiming the buried highway. Trees and vegetation are growing through the dirt. Google Maps satellite imagery shows the former road almost entirely covered. Centralia's cultural legacy extends far beyond the boundaries of the ghost town itself. Most notably, the town inspired one of the most popular horror video game franchises in history. Or so the legend goes. The truth is more complicated. The original Silent Hill video games developed by Japanese game studio Konami were not directly inspired by Centralia. Game designer Masahiro Ito has confirmed this. The fog in the games was originally a technical workaround to hide the limited draw distance of early PlayStation hardware. However, the 2006 Silent Hill movie absolutely was inspired by Centralia. Screenwriter Roger Avery based the film's setting on stories his father had told him about the Pennsylvania ghost town. His father was a mining engineer. Director Christophe Gans stated they used what had happened to the city of Centralia to feed the mythology of Silent Hill. In fact, the movie's working title was simply Centralia. This was to avoid attracting troublesome Silent Hill fans during production. The parallels are obvious: an underground fire, an abandoned town, toxic gases, fog, an apocalyptic atmosphere that feels like the end of the world. The film's success brought renewed attention to Centralia. Suddenly, a disaster that had been slowly fading from public memory became famous again. Tourism increased dramatically. Urban explorers and horror fans made pilgrimages to see the real-life inspiration for Silent Hill. Beyond Silent Hill, Centralia has inspired books, documentaries, songs, and countless articles. David de Kock's books remain the definitive accounts of the disaster. Unseen Danger from 1986, Fire Underground from 2009. The 2007 documentary, The Town That Was Brought the Story to Netflix Audiences Worldwide. When the documentary Centralia, Pennsylvania's Lost Town premiered in Pottsville in 2017, it became an unexpected reunion. Former residents who had not seen each other in years gathered at the theater. Rose Connors traveled from Flemington, New Jersey with her husband. It brought a lot of memories back, she said. Her grandparents had lived at 300 East Park Street. Joe Kirvella was the theater's audio engineer. He observed something beautiful. The show was like a reunion for former residents of Centralia who have not seen each other in years. There was just this great energy with the people who used to live in the town. That hometown vibe never went away. For those who lived through the disaster, Centralia remains home even if they can never return. Former Postmaster Tom Dempsey remembered knowing all 560 families who came to pick up their mail, everyone by their first name. Bernadette Hutnick now lives in Miami. She still returns for pilgrimages to the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Her grandparents helped raise money to build it. Former Mayor Anne Marie Callahan Devine lived through seeing her hometown destroyed. All the buildings in the town were demolished, including her house. She attended a 2019 pilgrimage. "We are here by the grace of God," she said. "You can really feel God's presence in this beautiful place." Today, more than 60 years after a routine landfill cleanup went catastrophically wrong, the Centralia fire continues to burn. It has consumed an estimated 400 acres of coal. It shows no signs of stopping. Scientists project it could burn for another 250 years, perhaps longer. The Pennsylvania Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation monitors the fire. They have over 75 thermal monitoring wells installed in the 1980s. They conduct monthly visual surface monitoring, yearly borehole temperature checks. But there are no plans to extinguish the fire. The estimated cost would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, with no guarantee of success. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection warns visitors that the area remains extremely dangerous. There is potential for serious injury or death. the ground can collapse without warning. Toxic gases like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide can accumulate in pockets. They can overwhelm anyone who stumbles into them. When the last of Centralia's remaining residents passes away, their properties will revert to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Under state municipality law, when a borough can no longer form a functioning municipal government when there are literally no residents left, the borough legally ceases to exist. Centralia, a town that once boasted nearly 3,000 residents, 7 churches, and 27 saloons, will finally disappear from the map. But the fire will keep burning. What can we learn from Centralia's tragedy? First, that small decisions can have enormous consequences. A decision to burn some garbage without properly sealing a hole in the ground set off a disaster that has lasted more than 6 decades. It will continue for centuries more. The total cost in firefighting efforts, relocation programs, destroyed property, and shattered lives runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars, all because of a 15-foot hole that nobody bothered to fill with fireproof material. Second, that bureaucracy and buck passing can turn a manageable problem into an unstoppable catastrophe. In August 1962, Gordon Smith offered to dig out the fire with a steam shovel for $175. That offer was declined because it required exploratory drilling that might have delayed other projects. By the time the government committed serious resources, the fire had spread beyond any hope of containment. An additional $10,000 or $20,000 in 1962 might have saved the town. Instead, we have spent hundreds of millions and lost everything. Third, the communities are fragile things. Centralia was not just buildings and streets, it was generations of families, networks of relationships, shared memories, common history. When the government offered buyouts, it did not just purchase real estate. It dissolved the bonds that held a community together. Neighbors who had been friends for decades became enemies over the question of whether to stay or go. Something precious was lost that money can never replace. Fourth, that some disasters cannot be fixed. We like to believe that technology and money can solve any problem. Centralia proves otherwise. Despite spending millions of dollars and trying every technique engineers could devise, we could not put out a fire we could not reach. Sometimes nature wins. Finally, Centralia reminds us that home is more than just a place. Harold Mervyn still lives in the house where his father was born in 1916. The Ukrainian Catholic Church still holds services every Sunday for people whose families helped build it more than a century ago. Former residents still gather for reunions and pilgrimages, drawn back to a town that exists now mostly in memory. The fire beneath Centralia will burn for generations to come. The coal will eventually run out. The flames will finally die. The earth will cool. But by then, everyone who remembered Centralia as a living, breathing community will be long gone. If you found this story as fascinating and tragic as I did, please consider subscribing to the channel. These deep dives into forgotten history take a lot of research and time. Your support really makes a difference. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss another story like this. What remains is a warning written in smoke and steam. A reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not always as solid as it seems. That even the most stable-looking community can vanish in a matter of years. The people of Centralia learned that lesson the hard way. And somewhere beneath the quiet hills of eastern Pennsylvania, the fire burns on.